Welcome back to another episode of The Deep Dive, where we unpack the most pressing topics in life sciences. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest hurdles in the industry right now: gene and cell therapy manufacturing. These therapies are groundbreaking, but the road to scalable, compliant, and cost effective production is anything but straightforward.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this conversation so important. On the one hand, gene and cell therapies hold enormous promise, curing rare diseases, reprogramming cells to fight cancer, potentially even repairing genetic defects at the root cause. But when you peel back the science and look at the manufacturing side, there are so many challenges companies have to solve before these treatments can reach more patients.
Let's start with scalability, because that's the one I hear most often. A therapy might work beautifully in a small clinical study where you're treating maybe a few dozen patients, but when you try to scale that same process for hundreds or thousands of patients, the complexity skyrockets. Many of these therapies are autologous, meaning they're made from a patient's own cells. That makes them highly personalized, but also incredibly difficult to scale.
Right, each batch is essentially a batch of one. You can't just run a huge 10,000-liter bioreactor and crank out doses like you can with monoclonal antibodies. Every patient needs their own process run, their own testing, their own documentation. That creates both operational bottlenecks and regulatory headaches.
And then you have supply chain. For autologous therapies, the timeline is often days. You're collecting cells from a patient, shipping them to a manufacturing facility, modifying them, testing them, and then getting them back into the clinic for infusion. Any disruption in that chain, shipping delays, temperature excursions, even paperwork errors, can jeopardize the entire treatment.
And that's before you even get to quality control. With traditional biologics, you can test a representative sample of a batch. With cell therapies, every dose has to be tested because every dose is unique. That's resource intensive, and it puts a lot of pressure on both manufacturing capacity and regulatory alignment.
Absolutely. And let's not forget cost. Right now, many of these therapies carry price tags of several hundred thousand to over $1 million per patient. That's not just a barrier for patients and payers, it's also tied directly to the manufacturing challenges. The more manual, resource heavy, and customized the process is, the higher the cost.
That's a great point. Companies are racing to introduce automation into these workflows: closed systems, robotics for cell handling, AI-driven analytics, but we're still in early days. Automation can reduce variability and free up human labor, but the regulatory agencies want to see proof that these systems are just as reliable, if not more so, than manual methods.
And speaking of reliability, let's touch on raw materials. One issue we hear about constantly is the variability in critical inputs, whether it's growth media, viral vectors, or reagents. A change in supplier or even a slight difference between lots can dramatically affect yield and quality. That means vendor qualification and raw material traceability become absolutely mission critical.
Exactly. And that ties directly into workforce expertise. Unlike traditional pharma, gene and cell therapy manufacturing is still highly specialized. Companies need scientists and operators who understand both the biology and the engineering. Training that workforce, building those skills at scale, is a bottleneck in itself.
And on top of that, you've got the push toward digitalization. Electronic batch records, real time monitoring, and advanced analytics are becoming essential. They help reduce human error and provide the data trail regulators expect, but the implementation isn't simple. Many facilities are still transitioning away from paper based systems, and integration across sites is a huge undertaking.
Speaking of regulators, the FDA and EMA are watching this space closely. They recognize the promise of these therapies, but they're also cautious. Manufacturing consistency is a huge focus. If you're producing a therapy for 100 patients, how do you ensure that the 100th dose is as safe and effective as the first? That's a big question.
And then there's the global picture. If you're developing a therapy that you want to launch in multiple markets, you're facing not just one set of expectations, but multiple. Some regulators emphasize comparability studies, others focus heavily on raw material traceability. And because gene and cell therapies are still relatively new, the guidance is evolving. Companies often find themselves navigating moving goalposts.
And all of that circles back to why manufacturing strategy has to be baked in from the start. You can't treat it as an afterthought. When companies wait until late-phase trials to start thinking seriously about scale-up, logistics, or automation, they often hit walls that are expensive and time-consuming to overcome.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the work we do comes in of helping companies anticipate those hurdles before they become roadblocks, whether it's vendor qualification, technology transfer, regulatory engagement, or quality system alignment. Proactive planning can save years and millions of dollars.
At the end of the day, the science is exciting. These therapies are changing lives. But if the industry can't solve the manufacturing challenges, scalability, quality, cost, supply chain, they'll remain out of reach for most patients. That's why this isn't just a technical problem, it's a patient access problem.
Well said. And over the next decade, the companies that succeed will be the ones that can balance innovation with operational excellence. Because it's not just about developing the therapy, it's about delivering it reliably, safely, and at scale.
Another piece we haven't touched on yet is facilities. A lot of companies underestimate just how specialized their infrastructure needs to be. You can't just retrofit a traditional biologics plant for cell therapy. These processes demand cleanroom environments, advanced biocontainment, and often modular setups that allow for multiple patient batches to be processed simultaneously without risk of cross-contamination.
Exactly. And the cost of building those facilities is staggering. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes even more. And because the science is evolving so quickly, there's a real risk of obsolescence. A company might invest in a particular technology platform today, only to find that in 5 years, the industry has moved on to a more efficient approach.
That's why we're seeing a shift toward flexible and modular facilities. Instead of massive, fixed brick-and-mortar plants, companies are investing in smaller, adaptable suites that can be reconfigured as processes change. Some are even looking at mobile manufacturing units, basically clean rooms on wheels, that can be deployed closer to patients or trial sites.
Which ties into another huge challenge: patient access logistics. Especially for autologous therapies, the patient journey is tightly linked to the manufacturing journey. You can't separate the two. Coordinating scheduling between hospitals, couriers, and manufacturing slots is like air traffic control. If one piece slips, the whole chain is at risk.
And we've heard from clinicians that this creates tremendous stress. A patient is waiting for treatment, sometimes literally counting on it as their last option. And the team is navigating not just medical variables, but shipping logistics, customs clearances, and even weather delays. That's a lot of pressure riding on every handoff.
On the flip side, this is also where digital tracking technologies are making a real impact. Advanced chain of identity and chain of custody systems can give everyone, from the hospital nurse to the manufacturing operator, real-time visibility into where a patient's cells are, what stage they're in, and when they're expected back. That transparency reduces errors and builds confidence.
Right. But it also raises the question of standardization. With so many players in the ecosystem, different hospitals, logistics providers, CDMOs, how do we make sure everyone is using compatible systems and speaking the same language? Without common standards, we risk fragmentation that slows down the entire field.
And that's where industry consortia and public-private partnerships become essential. Groups like ARM and Bioforum are working on shared frameworks for manufacturing, quality, and data interoperability. Regulators are also encouraging alignment because they know global standardization will ultimately accelerate patient access.
Another piece we should highlight is partnerships themselves. Few companies can do this alone. We're seeing biotech innovators partner with CDMOs, tech companies, and even payers to share expertise and resources. The days of trying to vertically integrate everything are fading fast.
That's a great point. And these partnerships aren't just about manufacturing, they're about economics too. Payers are demanding evidence of long term value, and that loops back into how therapies are manufactured, priced, and delivered. If the cost of goods can't come down, it will be very difficult to sustain reimbursement models, especially as the pipeline grows.
Exactly. And let's not forget sustainability. With the amount of single use plastics, energy demands for clean rooms, and global shipping required, the environmental footprint of cell and gene therapy manufacturing is significant. More companies are starting to ask, how do we make these processes not only efficient, but sustainable in the long term?
That's such an important question. Because ultimately, if we want gene and cell therapies to become mainstream, not just miracle treatments for a select few, we have to solve for scale, cost, consistency, and sustainability all at once.
And maybe one more piece we should touch on is workforce skills. You need operators who understand aseptic technique, molecular biology, automation systems, and regulatory compliance, all in one. The talent shortage is real, and training programs are struggling to keep up. Without the right people in place, even the best facility and technology won't deliver.
Absolutely. And that's where digital twins and simulation tools are starting to play a role. Like companies are training staff in virtual environments before they ever step into a clean room. That not only reduces error rates, it accelerates onboarding at a time when speed is critical.
When you pull all of this together, the infrastructure, the logistics, the standards, the partnerships, the workforce, you start to see just how interconnected the challenges are. You can't fix one in isolation. They all feed into each other, and solving them requires a holistic approach.
And that's why this topic resonates so much with the industry. It's not just about science anymore, it's about systems. And those who can master the systems side will be the ones who truly unlock the potential of these groundbreaking therapies.
Another area we should touch on is innovation in raw materials and supply inputs. For many cell and gene therapies, critical reagents like viral vectors or plasmids are in short supply. That scarcity not only drives up cost, but also creates production delays. Companies are experimenting with novel vector platforms, synthetic alternatives, and improved manufacturing yields to ease that bottleneck.
Right? And those innovations have a ripple effect. If you can make viral vector production more efficient, you don't just lower costs, you increase reliability, which strengthens the entire supply chain. It also helps standardize processes so regulators can feel more confident about consistency between batches.
Speaking of regulators, the future here is really interesting. Agencies like the FDA, EMA, and Health Canada are signaling that they don't just want companies to submit data. They want companies to proactively engage early. Pre-IND and scientific advice meetings are becoming critical for clarifying expectations before you ever run a large-scale trial.
And we're also seeing new guidances emerge around comparability, potency assays, and real world evidence. Regulators understand that traditional frameworks don't always fit cell and gene therapies, so they're adapting in real time. For companies, that means staying agile. What's acceptable today may shift 2 or 3 years down the road.
Exactly. Which brings us to reimbursement. Even if you solve manufacturing and regulatory challenges, you still need payers on board. Right now, many gene therapies are priced at $1 to $2 million per treatment. That raises hard questions about affordability and value. We're starting to see outcomes-based agreements, where payers only cover the therapy if it delivers the promised benefit over time.
That's an important point. Manufacturing efficiency and payer acceptance are tightly linked. If companies can lower their cost of goods through automation, digitalization, and smarter supply chains, they'll have more room to negotiate sustainable pricing models. Without that, adoption will stall.
And patients are at the center of all of this. One of the biggest lessons we've learned from early launches is that manufacturing bottlenecks don't just delay products, they delay hope. For a patient with a rare disease, every month waiting for treatment can mean progression or loss of function. That urgency is what drives the push for faster, more reliable manufacturing systems.
Absolutely. And the patient voice is becoming more influential in shaping industry practices. Advocacy groups are pressuring companies and regulators to work together on accelerated pathways, compassionate use programs, and manufacturing strategies that prioritize timely access.
Looking ahead, I think we'll see a hybrid model emerge. Autologous therapies will continue to dominate for highly personalized diseases, but allogeneic off the shelf approaches, where donor cells are engineered and stored in advance, could be the real unlock for scalability. Imagine having a freezer of engineered T cells ready for infusion, instead of starting from scratch with every patient.
That's where we'll really see the convergence of science and manufacturing. If off the shelf therapies can prove safe and effective, we suddenly shift from artisanal one patient batches to something much closer to mass production. That would be transformative, not just for cost and logistics, but for global accessibility.
And yet, we can't underestimate the transition period. For at least the next decade, the industry will have to juggle both models, autologous and allogeneic, while regulators, payers, and manufacturers adapt. That means complexity will increase before it decreases.
Which is exactly why strategic planning is so critical. Companies need to ask themselves, are we building infrastructure that only works for today, or are we investing in platforms that can flex as the science evolves? The winners will be those who think two steps ahead, not just about their first product launch, but about what their pipeline will demand 5 to 10 years from now.
And at the end of the day, that's what makes this such an exciting but challenging space. Gene and cell therapies are rewriting what's possible in medicine. The science is already extraordinary. But unless we solve the manufacturing puzzle, the promise won't translate into broad patient impact.
That's the real challenge and the real opportunity. We're standing at the intersection of discovery and delivery, and how the industry navigates the next decade will determine whether these treatments remain niche miracles or become mainstream medicine.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, let's bring this full circle. Gene and cell therapies represent some of the most promising innovations in modern medicine. They're reshaping how we think about treating, and in some cases curing, diseases that were once untouchable. But the science alone isn't enough. Manufacturing is where the promise meets reality.
We've talked about scalability, supply chain, quality control, regulatory expectations, reimbursement, and patient access. Each of those challenges is daunting on its own. Together, they form the defining hurdle of this field. How do we move from extraordinary breakthroughs in the lab to reliable, accessible treatments in the clinic?
The encouraging part is that solutions are emerging. Automation, closed systems, digital platforms, and next-generation manufacturing technologies are advancing every year. Regulators are opening the door to new frameworks. Payers are experimenting with novel reimbursement models. And patients, through advocacy and participation, are pushing the industry forward faster than ever.
But there are deeper layers we need to keep in view. Workforce development is one. The skills required to make these therapies, aseptic operations, genetic engineering, regulatory expertise, don't fit neatly into traditional training pipelines. Companies, universities, and even governments will need to collaborate on building the next generation of biomanufacturing talent. Without skilled people behind the technology, even the most advanced tools won't deliver results.
There's also the question of sustainability. Manufacturing facilities consume enormous amounts of energy and generate significant waste, particularly through single-use plastics. If we're truly moving toward making these therapies standard of care, the industry will have to innovate not only for efficiency, but also for environmental responsibility. The future can't just be scalable, it has to be sustainable.
And globally, equity is on the line. While patients in developed countries may soon benefit from these breakthroughs, access in low and middle income nations remains uncertain. Addressing affordability, infrastructure gaps, and regulatory harmonization across regions will be critical if we want these therapies to transform healthcare worldwide rather than deepen existing disparities.
At Emma International, this is where we see our role, helping companies anticipate hurdles, align with regulators, and build strategies that don't just get products approved, but make them deliverable at scale. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about technology or compliance, it's about people. Every delay in manufacturing means a delay in treatment for someone who can't afford to wait.
So, as you think about the future of gene and cell therapies, remember this: the science is the spark, but manufacturing is the engine. If we can strengthen that engine through planning, innovation, collaboration, and a commitment to equity, then we unlock the full potential of this new era of medicine.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We'll continue exploring the most pressing topics in life sciences here on the Deep Dive, bringing insight into the issues that matter most to innovators, regulators, and patients alike. And if you'd like to learn more or connect with us, you can reach out anytime at info@emmainternational.com or visit our website, emmainternational.com.
Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.